Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Urban Air Planning Forum 2022, Part 1. Thank you for joining us, and especially thank you for our sponsors, Fraser-Nash Consultancy, and our supporters, RPAS UK, CAMI, Coventry City Council, DJB, Flying Forward 2020, Flightcrowd, Urban Airport, and Urban Air Mobility News. My name is Philip Butterworth-Hayes. I'm the Director of Communications and Strategy at Savata Global. We are a trade association set up to bring together local authorities and industry to start to understand where the responsibilities and the work programs lie between the various stakeholders of this extraordinary new industry. And behind the scenes, we have Kitty and Tash who are doing the real work to make sure everything runs smoothly. Very quickly, some housekeeping points. We plan to keep on time. The event is being recorded. More details are coming soon. The chat function is at the bottom of your screen, so please say hi and tell us you're here. And please do get involved in the chat. I will try and direct as many questions as I can to the panelists that we receive. So thanks for that. And if you want to ask a question, it's a small box at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions for our speakers, then post them there, and we'll try and get as many answers as possible. So getting back to today, here's the agenda for this afternoon, and it's going to be a really exciting event. Before I start, just a very quick word about Coventry, where at the Air One Vertiport here is being hosted. Coventry is a remarkable city. It's a medieval town, and it's the birthplace also of the UK's jet propulsion program back in the 1940s. But it's more than just a technology or a cultural centre. It has two cathedrals, one which is a ruin, which was destroyed in the bombing in 1940, and next to it, a very beautiful 1960s piece of architecture. I think one of the most beautiful modern buildings in the world. And you can't stop, but when you stand between these two buildings, just look at the future and the past in one place, and the future is full of hope. You're standing in a ruin, but at the same time, you're looking at this quite magnificent building, and you get the feeling that although things might be tough now, in fact, in many parts of the world, they're devastating, there is hope. And this is what I want to talk about today, really, in this event, hope and the future, because to me, the idea of flying through a city in an electrically powered aircraft is kind of magical. And I really want to sort of understand how we're going to get to this magic, how we're going to get to this extraordinary future. So anyway, back to the agenda. First of all, we have a short presentation from Tim Mile from the Fraser-Nash Consultancy, who is our sponsor. And Tim, thank you very much indeed for that, and over to you.
Hey Phil, thank you for that. Hopefully everyone can hear me. So yeah, good afternoon all, or good afternoon everyone who's in the UK anyway. I see we've got people popping up from all over the world, which is fantastic. Welcome. So my name's Tim Mile. I'm responsible for Fraser-Nash Consultancy's focus on the civil aerospace and the aviation markets, but also on the rail and the road sector. So I guess I bring a sort of multimodal view to the conference today. I'm mega excited to be here today and tomorrow, and excited that Fraser-Nash are sponsoring this event. And I'm really looking forward to learning a bit more about the infrastructure, the planning, the operational, the regulatory, and the public perception opportunities and challenges for this rapidly growing segment of the aviation and the transport industry. Why am I here today? Well, our 900 engineers, physicists, and scientists at Fraser-Nash are really passionate about solving complex technology challenges. We're renowned for making a real difference, utilising our systems engineering approach on some of the UK's most complicated engineering and technology programmes. And that includes urban air mobility, it includes advanced air mobility, it includes drones. So for example, by working really closely with the Civil Aviation Authority here in the UK and with National Grid, Fraser-Nash has played a key role in enabling the very first beyond visual line of sight, or BVLOS, trials for drones in the UK in unsegregated airspace. Something that will really help to unlock this part of the market. We're working extensively with National Highways in the UK, helping them in their strategy for the deployment of drones to improve safety and improve efficiency on the national road network. And I'm delighted to say that we're also supporting Vertical Aerospace, fascinating company, have grown up in the Bristol area and are now one of the biggest players worldwide in the electric vertical takeoff and landing, eVTOL, advanced air mobility space. We're working with Vertical on their test aircraft, which is due for a flight test this year. Our focus on all these projects is consistently on the system of systems that will enable the safe operation of the aircraft and the infrastructure. So yes, we are big believers in technology, and in technology providing benefit to society and to communities. But we're not just technology evangelists. We're not technology evangelists. For us, the economics of these future systems, the likely demand for their services, the public perception of the technology, and obviously our ability to integrate them into thriving urban and rural areas is just so important that this technology won't find application if those things aren't ticked. And that's exactly why events like today and tomorrow are so crucial. So I hope that you all enjoy the next couple of hours. And I look forward to hearing from some of you on the panel discussions later and after the event. Thank you very much. Thank you, Phil.
Thanks, Tim, very much indeed. I'd now like to hand the microphone over to Professor Martin Reeves, who is the CEO of Coventry City Council.
Phil, thank you very much. And Tim, thank you very much for your support today and all the other partners that has made this possible. I too am excited about some of the discussions that we're going to have, and I'm delighted to be part of the panel discussion shortly. Let me just say, as way of an introduction, three quick things. One, just a warm welcome. Secondly, just something about change and how cities and actually all environments are changing globally, what that might mean. And then thirdly, why Coventry? And Phil's already done a brilliant, from me, unpaid job of celebrating our great city of Coventry. So let's quickly go through that, just a few minutes then. First of all, a massive warm welcome, as I said at the beginning. It's lovely to have people from not just the UK, but from different parts of the globe that are clearly interested in how we can all work together to reimagine what this future could look like. And certainly welcome to everybody else who's had interest in this for some time, or even if it's quite a fleeting new interest in what all of this might mean for you, either a personal or a professional capacity. You're really welcome, and it's just a shame that we aren't all together in person, but those opportunities will start coming again over the coming months and years. So that's the first bit. The second bit, change, and why these conversations are so important. I've been an advocate for some time for the fact that it is impossible when you see at least the last decade and a half of some of the most significant global shifts. I talk about tectonic plates shifting all over the place, geopolitically, environmentally, socially, economically, financially, and actually then presume that the way in which we connect people to each other, the way in which we connect services, goods, the way in which we create very different economic and social opportunities by using the power of not just what is available technologically to us now, but imagining what might be the case to solve problems of both now and the future by just thinking differently about what's available to us. How could we possibly think that steady state would deliver some of the incredible opportunities and solutions to what are some really quite significant enduring social problems for cities and also rural areas up and down the UK and across the globe? So it's exciting, but it's also a heady challenge to think about change. And of course, we've all gone through and are going through, for some still, one of the most significant tectonic plates shifting around the global pandemic and COVID. And what that's done, of course, is provide, I think, an opportunity for us to think together on what behavioural shifts, modal changes, patterns of change that have been clearly evidenced and witnessed over the last 2 years in terms of where we work from, what we expect, what our levels of patience thresholds are, how we communicate And how much of that is enduring, how much of that is fleeting and the result of what we've been through. But whether we know that or not, at what point are we going to harness some of this to be able to be absolutely clear about what the future possibilities are? So I'm incredibly excited about where this fits into that change environment. And then finally, why Coventry? And Phil, joking aside, has done a great job of selling my and our great city. But the truth about this is evidential. We're a young, dynamic city. We're a large city. We're one of the fastest growing cities outside of London in the UK. We have two incredible universities with over 60,000 students. Little known fact, but should be aware we're a city of first, whichever way you look. We've already heard about something about jet propulsion, the bicycle, the car, but actually right through our history, including in the early 1970s, the entire environmental consciousness global movement was started in Coventry, in a kitchen, with the first origins and genesis of the Green Party. So actually, we've got a lot of firsts, and we also are the first city ever in the UK context to split Oxford and Cambridge on patents pending and R&D assets and potential. So it's real. We know how to disrupt and innovate. And that's the final bit I'll leave you with, film colleagues. Why Coventry? It didn't surprise me when conversations started happening about something of a demonstrator working with partners, including Urban Airport, thinking about how we could be audacious and show just what is possible to stimulate the very conversations that we're going to spend time today and tomorrow talking about, because I haven't got the answers to those. But unless you stimulate, and it didn't surprise me that Coventry will put its hand up first, and it feels authentic to be able to do that in a place of innovation, disruption, where we've been there before, and we'll always put our hands up to be right up front, even if we haven't got all of the answers. So thanks, everyone. Really look forward to the conversations.
Thanks, Martin, very much indeed. So what we're going to do now is just, before we go to the panel discussion, just show you a very brief video of what our conclusions are, or or the questions that came up when we visited the Air One demonstration last month. So if you could play the video, that'd be great.
Main functionality of this demonstration is to show how a typical logistics drone aircraft can be put on a FATO or a TLOF, a takeoff and landing platform, can be controlled using a command control center, which is located within the building, that can then enter into a airspace which has been regulated both by the CAA and the local airport environment, and to present to the public of how future transportation can be seen to work, both from a logistics and from a passenger capability.
Where or in a sort of incremental way that we would like to do this, but you couldn't get your head around how to operate because legislations, legalities, and all of that doesn't allow you to just take a drone off from somewhere and land it somewhere.
The ConOps and the standard operation procedures that we've developed today to make this happen is very still much in draft form. We have done it obviously to the regulation requirements by the CAA. We have been in discussions from day one with them. We have done a number of integration workshops, both with CAA, the operators that you see today, and the local environment. So it's building on that ground foundation element and working with future aircraft, future CAA subject matter experts to develop how we move forward.
And these are my views. I just want to make that clear, and not the views of rest of the authority, but they're actually gradually buying because I'm selling the story. But if you had a structure like this, I would like to start off with the emergency services, because if they have a structure where they can operate from and land safely and take off drones safely, then the emergency services, rather than having a fire engine sitting somewhere else, an ambulance sitting in the ambulance service area, and the police sitting elsewhere, and the local authority sitting elsewhere, if all those services were sitting in one area and an incident of any sort happens, you can very quickly discharge a drone, go and investigate that incident, and give you live images of what it is. But there's a decision to be made now. Do I need to send 4 vehicles out there, or can I just send the council out to sweep up the road that's just created that congestion?
There's the opportunity to use a facility like this. So, for example, pre-planned operations. Say if we were doing an operation within Coventry around antisocial behaviour or high crime, we could use a facility like this as a safe takeoff and landing site for our aircraft. But we tend to find that most of our work is dynamic, so we'll turn up at a job and literally have to lift from where we stood.
And people's perception at the moment is, well, I'm going to get my pizzas delivered in the back garden, or I'm going to get my Amazon parcels delivered to my front door. Well, that's not the reality. The reality is we start off with people's acceptance of drones flying in the airspace, because we've saturated our roads. You're asking what's the benefit for the council. We have a green agenda to meet. We've got to meet our net zero targets. How do we do that? We can't do much more with the roads.
This is just more than a passenger experience. What we have here is a community. It's a community where we have police operating drones, where we have quite an extensive cargo operation of drones, intermixed with the passenger carrying eVTOL operation. And that makes life a lot more complicated in a way for all the stakeholders involved, including the National Aviation Regulator and the local authorities and the drone operators. The other thing that we've learned, which is quite important, is that it's not the aviation regulator or the drone operator or the eVTOL operator that's taking the lead. It is the local authority as well, who is giving its advice to the central government agencies about how they can integrate their expertise, their local expertise, because they will be licensing this. This will have to be licensed and identified as a location by the local authority. It's a lot more complicated when you actually come to somewhere like this and you see the hub, you see the activities, you see the businesses that will be relying on vertiports in the future, fully integrated with drones and eVTOL operations. That's the vision of Coventry. I'm sure it's not going to be the vision everywhere, but if it is indeed the way that we're going forward with drones and eVTOLs integrated into a single transport hub, then this is a lot more complicated than we originally thought. Thank you. I understand there might have been some technical problems there with the video, but hopefully you'd have heard what we discovered and some of the big questions. And this panel, we're going to look at some of the big questions before we actually drill down into who's going to be responsible for what. And delighted that we have a fantastic panel here. Gary Cutts, Challenge Director, Future Flight UK Research and Innovation, Professor Martin Reeves, Sunil Badeo, Transport and Innovation Manager from Coventry, who you just saw, and Darren Holder, Head of Air Planning at Urban Airport. So I'd like to start off with a question to you each. Gary, what's the UK government's view on the future of urban air mobility and the UK? I mean, is it as it could be a potential is this a potential Brexit opportunity? What's the government's view?
Thank you, Phil. So if I can, I'll answer that in 3 parts. I'll go back to the original business case that we submitted through Treasury and Bays back probably 3.5 years ago. And there are really 3 classes of benefits for us. Number 1 is this is a new market, it's a new industry. As we said in the intro part, this is not aviation as we knew it, it's something new, exciting and different. And the UK would love to be a world leader in that. There's opportunity for high-tech jobs, taking a lead in provision of services and helping to create markets. And as an example, this is at least a 50 billion annual market, and we talk about there being north of 30,000 jobs in the UK by 2030. So we absolutely see it as a generator of wealth in the provision of the services. Secondly, there's what do we do with these new forms of transport? And for us, it's all about better connectivity, which is really obvious, but better connectivity, people, goods, and provision of services. And if I can, in 30 seconds, I'll come back to that. The third class of benefits is also really important, but a little bit subtle, I would guess, is that essentially what we're developing is a green, sustainable, zero carbon aviation system. To do that for the main commercial air transport is really tough and is a long way off. So we can just kickstart that whole journey. We can try things at a smaller scale. We can de-risk, we can prototype, we can just create energy and drive. So we're also pulling along that concept of zero carbon aviation. All three of those are central to our business plan. But what I'd like to do is come back to the middle one, I guess. This idea that we don't just provide technology for technology's sake. The markets clearly will not evolve if we think the technology is brilliant, but the public doesn't buy it. So we have to provide services and goods that the public wants. But we see so many opportunities. We'll come back to them this afternoon, I'm sure. Everything from transport within cities, the kind of much talked about electric air taxi, but then the concept of commuting into cities, your 30-mile journeys, how do you do that in a third of the time for a comparable cost? How do you move between airports? We see huge opportunities to connect really badly connected places. We've done so many studies looking at transport between towns, villages, and small cities in the UK, where large amounts of people need to move to generate wealth, to provide services, and for people's personal lives, but they're really badly connected. So we just love the idea of giving a less infrastructure intensive, less infrastructure heavy way of transporting people and doing that in a zero carbon, much faster way. So for us, we have a real vision about this as an opportunity for connectivity and creating economic gains for the regions across the UK.
Thank you, Gary. So Martin, what will it mean for Coventry? What will urban air mobility mean for jobs, for improved transport, for improved environmental? It still seems to me somewhat bizarre that we're even talking about it at this stage. So, but have you done any work to actually think about what this will mean for the city?
Thanks, Phil. I think Gary's done a great job in giving kind of the overview in macro terms on this. So it's potentially very, very significant in volume of job creation, impact on local economies, regional economies, and arguably GDP and output for the UK as well. Otherwise, people wouldn't be interested. Now, good news about all of this is, don't have many expertise, but one thing I know a little bit about is economics. So what I'm always cautious about, colleagues, is you lose people when you create fanciful exponential growth on job creation, for example, and local impact. But let me tell you that cities like Coventry, and I would argue most post-industrial cities that have reimagined themselves across the whole of the UK, need to continue as a result of, first of all, some of the shocks coming through Brexit on local economies and certainly export as well as import, but also obviously the pandemic, as I mentioned, and what that's done, not least some of the shocks at the moment around energy prices. What cities are learning is you have to make sure that you go where your assets are, number one, or you'll be found out. But number two, you diversify wherever you're able to based on that asset base. So for example, in Coventry, when I arrived, and actually 2 decades before my arrival, there was far too much in local economic terms and strategy terms based on automotive per se. But when you then start to understand what this could mean, it's a classic case of an ecosystem that, when done properly, can be honest about some of the net impacts, where you will see, as a result of connectivity, productivity gains, you will see some jobs being removed from the local economy. And you've got to be honest about that. But you'll see different, more highly skilled, often jobs, but often creating greater opportunities for our communities across the wider ecosystem. And I'll give you the only parallel I can give you, colleagues, is because I don't know what the modelling will look like, other than it's big. and we need it in Coventry to be an ecosystem that's diversified to give us future potential for our generations to come. But all I can say, automotive is a good example. Whilst we've seen dramatic impacts on the automotive sector across the UK, with significant trends often showing peaks and troughs quite significantly, Coventry is a great example where you don't look back with passive nostalgia, but actually what you do is you use the power of what you've got in the existing ecosystem and project it forward, in our case, to electrification. And you start thinking about the kinds of jobs, the skills, the broad base for the local economy as a result of moving forward and leaping beyond the combustion engine into electrification. Now, why am I saying that? Evidently now, there are more jobs with higher value output in the related automotive sector in Coventry in the West Midlands than there ever has been at that so-called heyday of motor manufacturing. So why not say exactly the same for thinking about urban air mobility in a fundamentally different way around that ecosystem? But my final comment would be, you've got to be realistic. You've got to see where the investment in the skills is. You've got to see where the supply chain comes through and gets supported and grow. Otherwise, you end up with exponential growth and the inability for labour and skills to catch up with that growth. And then the final bit I'll say is that the R&D potential, and Gary said this brilliantly, the capitalisation, which the UK still needs to do more of, to be able to monetise and commercialise some of that R&D innovation asset is not to be underestimated, not just for our university sector, but for our business sectors, both growing ones and emerging ones. So I'm quite excited about it, but I can't pin down a number other than the fact it's big.
Good, well, that's a good start, I guess. Thank you very much indeed, Martin. Sunil, you're at the business end of this, so you're involved in the actual transport infrastructure planning in Coventry. Let's just look at that as an urban transport planner. What does UAM mean to you? Is it a huge headache, or is it a huge opportunity, or is it both?
It's a huge challenge, but yeah, to put it into context, like I say, Gary and Martin have both covered it quite well. But for operational purposes, Phil, what and colleagues, it does help us is to understand. We feel, and with my background is in transportation on roads. I've been looking after traffic lights and traffic signals and highways for the past 35 years. This particular mode of transport is new. No local authority, and as Martin's alluded to that, you know, we're the first authority that have put our hands above and said, no, we will take this challenge on. To understand what it's going to allow us to do or what the benefits are going to be is significant, because the pandemic, if nothing else, has taught us that our roads get saturated. You know, people have now expected their deliveries, expected that, you know, all the deliveries would come via vans. And we can't cater for any more roads. We're constantly fighting this mode of addressing pollutions, trying to meet our net zero targets. How do we do that? What difference has it made us to the local authority? We feel that's the missing link in transportation, because we've exploited air. Commercial air is exploited. People travel and accept that. People travel on roads and rails, and all of that, that infrastructure is in place. This infrastructure will allow a lot of that development. It will fit the missing link in how it can improve lives. Examples I gave on the video that, you know, you could really reduce the number of vehicles that are traveling, but on the same token, economical growth, it will generate jobs. It will make sure that, you know, the lives will improve. What we learned as a local authority so far is legislative changes are needed. There is a lot of aviation input that we need. The aviation authorities need to help us, because we don't understand that. As local authorities, we've never been involved in this level of detail is what is required. There was a question in one of the posts that, you know, what routes are we going to define, air corridors we're going to define. We have underutilized canal paths, you know, could we use those? So all of that sort of, you know, vision of where we take this mode of transport next is something that mistakes or sort of the lessons we've learned in building highways, we want to try and build those highways in skies, but not make the same mistakes. So we're not overpopulating, we're not over authorizing flights. Yeah, it has been a challenge to understand that strategic transport planning on it. You know, where are the corridors? How can we serve? We're building a great big gigafactory in Coventry. How can we serve that? We've got the OEMs. And the transportation of those goods and medical supplies are another key, you know, I mean, because these are the things that will save lives. We're working with the company called Skyfarer, who've developed a drone which will carry medical supplies, understanding their needs, working with the NHS, the emergency services. That's the lessons we've learned. How can we make lives better for our citizens?
These are all excellent points. I've been trying to get a statement from the Green Party in the UK on what they think about electric aviation, and is it something they'll support, because they don't support conventional aviation very much. And I haven't been able to get anything at all. It's been silence. I've tried a few times, and it would be great if there was some political green support for this, because I think that would accelerate things enormously. Darren, I'm going to come to you now. One of the problems it seems that we have is that when you're planning cities for 15 years, 99.9% of the cities in the world won't have thought about the third dimension, won't have thought about air in their strategic long-term plans. What have you learned in Coventry that will allow cities to say, yeah, this is what you need to do, this is what you need to think about when you're looking at drones and eVTOLs for your future?
Thanks, Phil. I think it's fair to say that we're all engaged here in the process of discovery. So yes, it's first for the UK, and it is just a starting point. We're going to learn from this. And well, at least we're all engaged in this new and exciting, innovative form of future air travel. And one of the first observations we can make on UAM is that it is a distributed model of air travel that doesn't necessarily rely on an airport. So what we have then is a shift to local, and that is the local authority is taking empowerment as part of the future transportation. It needs to align with local policy, strategic airport plans, or any of the smart city initiatives, which led us to the selection of site, which is an all-important challenge for us all. And we've managed to locate Air One in the heart of Coventry City, which really is a world first in terms of a demonstrator. But it has been, from our experience, a very iterative process. There's no reason to suggest how to go about consenting an urban airport as such. There's little consenting in the airport infrastructure for that matter, because a lot of that is legacy work for Coventry Airport. But we certainly, nothing wrong in not having that recent experience, but as long as we are open, we're transparent, and we're sharing and disseminating our findings, we can hopefully map out a process to benefit others. Another thing we learned from our experience is the importance of public consultation. And I think very key on this, as the past 2 weeks have told us, is that to raise public awareness is quite key when we eventually look at public acceptance. We want to demystify UAM and the technology that sits behind that. A vertiport is a new building type, and Air One certainly comes with a lot of new functionality that could be demonstrated to the general public. And we believe it's key to get public fully engaged, excited, feeling comfortable about the new technology. And hopefully it's something that they would adopt to in the future. And certainly we're able to present some of the more familiar environment that they're used to as they use travel facilities. And another thing, of course, is the importance of a demonstrator. Now, Coventry is leading the world here. We have a real life demonstrator to test UAM integration into our cities. It's hopefully beneficial then for the world to see, but really there's nothing more powerful than being able to show people in real life rather than telling them about it through text, through words, or through renderings and drawings as such. And really, Coventry is very unique to be able to put one up for the public to experience and to interact, discuss, and make comments. Which really then leads us to the public perception side of things, because with the past 2 weeks, we are able to offer the live experiences. We're able to discuss with the public. We're able to gauge immediate feedback, and we've asked them to also record their feelings so that we have those on record. And we're very proud to be able to offer Air One as a flexible pop-up infrastructure to test how UAM might integrate into future cities. And we hope that other cities in the world would put up a similar demonstrator to, again, help facilitate the understanding of future technology, what it all means, how it can be experienced by everybody, and how this technology will connect people, places, goods, and create new jobs, and how that might support local economy. But really, beyond the transportation of passengers and parcels, advanced air mobility is a powerful tool, as demonstrated in the past 2 weeks by West Midland Police. You know, we have the functionality and the capabilities to respond to emergencies, first responders, the policing side of things, which has been demonstrated. The advantages in having time-critical medical deliveries being made very efficiently, and ways to monitor and inspect existing infrastructure, certainly to maintain our existing infrastructure assets. So really, in terms of building social acceptance, it is a collaborative journey, and having a real-life demonstrator for the public to experience has been a gift for Coventry, and we're very proud to learn from that experience, and hopefully be able to pass on that experience to other municipalities.
Dan, thank you very much indeed for that. We've got some questions coming in about the role of land use planning and guide to property owners on whether an urban airport, how that should be approved. And this really speaks to the whole role of how you plan an urban airport in the middle of a city. What does it mean in terms of having to develop new rules and regulations for land use planning? Sunil, or perhaps you could just tell us a bit about this. Is this a one-off demonstration which will then sort of, you know, be of historical importance, or will there be something going forward?
It is a one-off demonstration at the moment, but we are learning from it, as in, you know, we've gone through a full process of putting a full planning application as if this was going to be a real sim. The land that we're currently using is a development piece of land. So the demonstration we're trying to show is if there is that piece of land and if there's the willingness for people to exploit that connectivity. As Darren's alluded to, the reason we've chosen that site is the true interconnectivity of transportation. We've got a very old historical listed train station, but we've just opened up a new access to that. So the connectivity to the new train station, a new bus interchange. The city centre is only 2 minutes walk away from the actual site, and we're building a brand new business development hub within that area. So attracting new businesses into that that environment was key, so that we could demonstrate, and the visitors we've had coming from all over the globe can understand now that how this structure can be deployed in an urban environment and operate in an urban environment where you've got tall buildings. How can we make sure that they're operated safely and they've got that connectivity? So that's been the challenge for us, but we have got that process, and we've done a full planning application as if this was the permanent structure. even though it's a temporary structure at the moment.
Thank you, Sunil. One of the things that I'm not clear about is billions have gone into developing flying vehicles, eVTOLs. Very little money has gone into investing in infrastructure yet. Gary, one of the things which I think we need to understand is how we move from where we are now, where there's nothing at all, to having a fairly well-financed infrastructure to support urban drone and eVTOL operations, when there's no clear business case at the moment and there's no previous historic data to understand where we're coming from. What's the view of, what's your view on how we can actually start looking at some of the financing of the infrastructure challenge?
So I'm going to do a two-part answer if I can. First off, this industry has moved on remarkably. I've been engaged just over 3 years. It's moved on remarkably. So 3 years ago, with the greatest of respect to everyone was working in their silos. They'd figured out their part of it, and we all kind of knew there was an ecosystem, and people were just starting the conversations. Now, when you look at the quality of discussions there are, almost everyone we work with has got some really interesting broad-based ecosystem partners. The Urban Airports Coventry City Council collaboration, along with other partners, is a really good example of that. So that, I think we've moved to the point where people understand all the things that need to be done. Our part of doing that as a UK government challenge has been to publish what we think is a pretty good piece of work in a roadmap that says between now and 2030, here's how we see the market developing. These are the big deliverables, and these are the things that need to get done. So it talks very much to the enablers to allow the markets to develop. And I will say, of course, that roadmap is bound to be inaccurate, because every roadmap that's ever been written is inaccurate. There are lots of different views about it, but we like to think we've got the same amount of people thinking it's too aggressive as think it's too passive and slow. So it's probably about right. But that roadmap, its job is very much to kind of knit together and sequence the things that need to be done. So I think the industry now understands, Phil, that part of it, and there's more to come there. And I could go on, because you look at the people we talk to. Tim's organisation on the call is a really good example of that. We've got as many people who are infrastructure, civil engineers, consultants engaged as we have aerospace engineers. To the financing, honestly, my sense is we're planning to do some work in the coming year. My sense is what you say is exactly right, that the finance markets in the round, all sources of capital are I'm going to say this with apologies to Darren, they're overdrawn towards certain elements here. The aircraft is really exciting, it's really visible, you can instantly understand the attraction, and it's just a thrilling world, isn't it? So they're pretty well capitalized, I would say. I mean, I'm sure you'd want more, but in that world. But the sorry, Darren, I'm kind of describing you as an OEM rather than the provider of the airport there. I was thinking of Supernal, but a lot of capital has gone there. And I think our story is to try and just talk about the other investment requirements. And I think that's at a fairly immature stage, Phil. I completely agree with you. So we are planning to do some kind of events that do a market showcase. But what you're really trying to do is go right back to, these are the aircraft OEMs that you know about and you're funding, but you're only funding them really because they're going to create a market. That market is realized by these vehicles flying in a place, and the vehicle can do nothing without that place existing. So it's just telling that kind of connected story, and then have them go, right, now I understand there's a new venture opportunity here, and there's a real story to tell. I would say I just don't think they've been told that story. I don't think the financial market's particularly negative. I just don't think they've engaged with it yet.
Phil, can I just come in on that? Because I think one of the, I think we've got to speak really, really candidly and clearly, including with central government, government departments, Treasury in particular, but also equity and debt markets. The truth about this is, and again, I will always say it how it is because it's evidential, the UK does not have a good track record on investment in infrastructure for the future. Now, we all know that, so let's just say it. We simply do not. And there is a very good reason that I can say that, because we're now in most, if not all, of our UK cities and regions still now hampered by, in effect, Victorian infrastructure. And actually some of it predated Victorian infrastructure. So let's just accept that and say we've now got a new opportunity. That's the first bit. The second bit, which Gary's alluding to, we are fooling ourselves if we think that through a green book discipline, for a traditional investment return model, through usual business cases, is going to cut this. It just simply will not, because it's nascent, it's fledgling, as you said, Phil. It's the natural investment, I speak again as an economist, the natural investment tendency is an acceptable and understandable one, which is to go low risk, high levels of honey, to go for it. What we need is the boring, unsexy infrastructure to be funded on a much longer return with very different upfront costs, which need to be shared both in terms of debt, equity, mix of commercial and public, as well as potentially answering the question, who ultimately pays for this kind of future green utility and dividend of thinking about the next dimension in a fundamentally different way. So I haven't got all the answers, but I think if we go forward thinking we can just pick a few modules off, invest in them to move forward, we are missing the scale of the opportunity and the challenge, and we will reinvent the poor, fractured infrastructure of the past, which has hampered us, right? But the other bit says, I think we've got a real opportunity in this space, and I think it was Tim, apologies if it wasn't in terms of intro, Tim, but around the notion of system within systems. If nothing else, I'm a massive fan of systems leadership and place leadership. So the truth from autonomous vehicles that Sunil has been close in Coventry, or this particular set of exciting conversations, what you have to do is you start somewhere. Arguably in disruption terms, it doesn't really matter where you start, but this is the point. You follow it everywhere. So issues around finance, regulation, planning, licensing, spatial use, customer behavior, future, current. We haven't got the answer, but you do not stop at each point. Liability, insurance, you've got to keep going, because actually the truth is the technological platforms, the infrastructure is there, and we will find a way. But unless you spend time ripening the problem you're trying to solve, the opportunities you're trying to optimize, and the fact that this will affect absolutely everything of that ecosystem, I'm afraid we will go back to be hampered, as the UK has been for far too long, about some of these opportunities. And I know there's people from all over the globe. We will be outmaneuvered by large parts of North America, significant parts of Scandinavia and the rest of Europe. And great, good luck to them. And this should be open source because it's a global challenge. But why would we make the same mistakes again? So if that's outspoken and unfair, but it's pretty much evidential from what I've seen over the last 2 decades working in cities and places.
It does beg, however, a question, is when you're looking at urban air mobility and its ecosystem, do you do it from a central planning point of view, where you have some kind of view of the end state? You have you know what the communications are going to look like, what the air traffic management system is going to look like, landing, or do you just build it up based on where you find capital? Because I'm still not clear yet on how you're going to finance something like Coventry. I don't know how much Coventry costs, but I know that when it goes operational, it'll cost a lot more when it goes fully operational. Where's that money coming from? There are 5 or 6 different really high-end expensive elements within the vertiport, including the UTM system, for example. Now, how is all this going to be funded, and how's it going to seamlessly operate together? One of the things about Coventry is that you start to see the scale of the problem, and the problem is not just technical, but it's a financing problem. Is there going to be central government money available for that? Darren, from your point of view, how do we go about funding this?
Well, I tend to think it should be locally led funding, because it needs to sit within the local authorities' remit in terms of strategic planning, transport planning, urban planning policy. But it does rely on the public sector to come in and support in terms of the venture capital funding and the business opportunities that sits around public policy. I think no one entity could do it themselves. It does rely on an ecosystem of partners, and we expect a system of partnerships to be in place to take it forward into the market. but it needs the backing of local authority. That's certainly the lessons we've learned so far in the experience of Air One.
So Darren, sorry Phil, I know you're chairing this, but this is the nub of it. So Darren, you're right, and I've loved our partnership with you guys, and this is how you solve big problems. And let's just have a reality check about what's possible. Local authorities up and down the country, every single place that will be watching this or interested in this, has an amazing covenant strength. We'll always be here. We have land ownership, we have amazing asset portfolios where we can lever significant capital in particular and potentially revenue to make some of this stuff happen, move it from demonstration into mid-scale, right? Coventry is pretty exemplified across many of the other big cities in the UK. We have seen over the last decade between a 50 and a 55% reduction in our revenue budgets. I'll say that again, 50 to 55 revenue in our revenue budgets. Now, at the same time, we've seen some interesting capital coming in, but we're completely constrained. So even very imaginative, innovative local authorities in the UK, like my own, who will take risks, we can lever significant into equity, debt and other partners, and we can lead by example. But I think there is a very, very sober conversation that needs to be had, which is almost identical to the one we're having at the moment more generally about the predictions of between 2.5 and 3 trillion required in this country to move towards the kind of initial green infrastructure that's required towards hydrogen electrification. So someone has to pay, and I'm not going to be on this call saying I'm one of the most risk-taking chief execs in the country. I think that's fair to say. I will struggle to lever without significant central government, bonds, private sector equity, the kind of ecosystem of funding. Otherwise, we'll all be disappointed. And I think that's an exciting conversation, but it's one that, if you're not careful, ends up going kind of in on itself. And we need to find out whether this problem is big enough to solve and whether the opportunities in front of us that Phil talked about at the beginning, and everyone, whether the dividend is big enough. I believe it is, otherwise I wouldn't be on this. But we feel like a long way away. And we're one of the most risk-taking, innovative, disruptive local authorities. So you can imagine those that are understandably right down the other end of risk profile, they won't get near even an initial finance demonstrator on how infrastructure can be funded. So I'm with you, we've got a big role, but I think we are so hamstrung now on our ability to lever this financially.
We are getting a bit off piece, but I think it's an interesting off piece. So I'm just one final question to anybody who might want to answer this. Where do we have those conversations? You talked about it's important to have this conversation. Where do we do that?
I don't want to dominate this, but the truth is, this is, if you think about productivity, levelling up, which is obviously through the Queen's speech, turbocharging the economy. You turbocharge economies, you level out places with sustainability, more prosperity that's shared by more of our communities across the UK, by thinking not just about the existing sectors, industries that are currently running a steady state and ensure they continue to grow. You fund, invest, and put as a strategic priority those that actually can be the future potential for the economic, social revival of our cities and our towns and even our rural areas, right? So if that's the case, then the conversations need to be had at the most senior political level, as they've had to be, and the arguments have been largely one around the broader issue around green infrastructure. That's hard yards. At the same time, we need equity markets and others to understand that their money in alongside us can start to lift the demonstrators into what I call the mid-scale. Gary will certainly know this. The challenge in the UK is moving from exciting fast prototyping and then not getting to that middle scale of almost like pseudo-industrial scale. We struggle there, and we need conversations, Phil, with some of the big financiers across the world actually, who are prepared to sit and wait for an annuity and a return. And finally, and I'll shut up, on ESG and the entire shareholder environment now, it's so much more natural to have those conversations with credit committees and of big equity and finance houses, because they know it's the right thing to be investing in. But the business cases are so fledgling, so nascent, it's a difficult cycle to get into. But they're the kind of stakeholders we need to talk to.
Thank you very much. Sunil, I guess the way we approach this is by taking the small steps that you described. We start off with drone operations, which will be publicly well received. emergency, healthcare, and then we build it up slowly and slowly and slowly. And is this something that you have actually sat down in Coventry now and actually looked at how you do that? How many verti stops, how many stopping places you might need? How far down the road have you actually detailed your plans for that?
Again, it's a fairly new approach to this, but just wanted to pick one more point up from what Martin's just alluded to, that, you know, we are actually the world's, we've demonstrated the world's first vertiport. UK is the lead, and if we don't take up what Martin's just alluded to, then we will be lagging behind others, because other authorities and other cities will take that over. But yes, we've had those sort of conversations. We have been closely working through this demonstration process with the likes of the West Midlands Police, the West Midlands Combined Authority. How can we use that infrastructure? How can we take those small steps? Do we now need to look at an infrastructure that is more manageable as a start point? Do we need the drone, the Air 1 type of scenario, or do we look at another structure that would actually be more acceptable and more operationally available, and economically it's more sort of easy to fund rather than this big funding? So the introduction of that in a smaller scale can be the sort of the start point of making sure that we build that infrastructure, because at the moment when we're looking at what we've seen at Air 1, it's a huge infrastructure. Now that could be effectively a hub and a spoke scenario. So you could have a hub and then have little spokes. So, you know, you could have the Amazon as a main hub, and the spokes come into the cities where we want to. So housing development, the hospitals, emergency services, they could be the spokes. So those sort of conversations, yes, we are having with them, and we're lucky enough to have won the second bid, in where we are trying to build infrastructures and develop beyond line of sight flying with funding from Innovate UK. So that's the next stage. So yeah, we are progressing, and it's something that we've now got our heads around it, and we don't want to take our foot off the gas on that one.
And if I could just add, Sunil, we have spoken about building a network, because if there's no point just having one vertiport, because you need a destination to fly to. And of course, in doing so, you would test the BVLOS capabilities, and you start creating a flight corridor system. But yeah, as you say, this is the first step, and we have been engaged in conversation to have other locations to create a network within the West Midlands. I think that's where we started the story. I think we should continue that story within the West Midlands.
And Darren, that's interesting, because you also have you also have plans for a cargo drone vertiport, if you like, as well.
Absolutely, because until we can actually have certified aircraft to carry people, I think if we can perfect the technology, if we could build and develop the capabilities of delivering parcels and make sure that that is safe to do, and people are have acceptance for it to fly over private property, over buildings, wherever the flight corridors may be established. I think once that is established and it's in people's imagination, I think it'll be easy transitioning through to passenger services in the future. But I think incremental steps, the next would be drone deliveries.
That's great, thank you. So we're now going to move on to the next stage, and unfortunately it was just getting really exciting, but we can pick that up later on. So this next stage, where we're looking at a little bit more detail into what the role of the various stakeholders are, because obviously we have civil aviation authorities, we have national regulators, we have operators, local authorities, and in a vertiport context, it's not totally clear yet about who is going to be responsible for what. So we've done another little video to try to frame some of these questions. I don't know, Kitty, whether we can actually start showing it. Thank you.
piece of land like this, we have to give the authorization that yes, you can operate from this area. That's local authorities aspect of it, you know, and that's where we are. We're not the experts. We don't have any experience in aviation. Well, you know, we don't know, but we're learning very fast, you know, and working with a consortium of team members of this particular project, we've learned a lot to say, you know, what do we need? And we want to share that experience because I think each authority will benefit from this knowledge. Why we took that leap of faith? We want to be a leader in innovation. It has the legislations, the requirements, and all of that has to be investigated and changed. It's like when we're doing this demonstration, we you know, the current regulation states that we have to actually have that safety zone. So 50 meters around the flight taking off and landing, we have to freeze everything. Well, that's not practical. So as a local authority, we're learning and we're advising the aviation authority, and this is where these projects like these are useful, so that we're not the experts in aviation. There are people who are very good at managing the aviation system. Let's learn from them and how we can implement it. You know, we've made big mistakes when we were designing our roads, you know, and rails and everything like that. Well, let's not make the same mistake when we start designing highways and skies.
When we first thought about this, we were very concerned how the public would perceive it, you know, from both an environmental perspective, but also, you know, from a visual context as well, and actually how they would actually use it. Would they want to use it? And they've been absolutely awed by it, and they said yes. When can we go in the aircraft? When can we use it? So it's been very positive.
Before we actually put a drone in the sky, we spent a whole 6 months campaigning. So we went into all the major cities and town centres at peak times, and we set up a stall and we sort of spoke to the public, explained what we were going to do with the drones, their use, how it could benefit them as a community, crime prevention, etc. And then we really got them on board before we actually sort of put. So by the time we'd put our first drone up in the sky, they had an idea of why we were there, and it basically was a benefit.
Thank you. That, I suppose, really that was quite a lot on the on what the public thought as well, but it has opened the door to the question about the public has to have a stakeholder role in this as well as everybody else. Gary, how far from the work that you've done, the technology research challenges, how far are you clear about what the different roles and responsibilities of everybody will be? Do we have that ecosystem full understanding, would you say?
So I think I covered this a little before. I think we either do or it's not very far off, Phil. You know, it's such an active ecosystem, this, and the bit I love is that most of the participants, they get that it's early stage and therefore you've got to be in sharing and working together mode. So rather than have the arms around the IP protection, people are working together. So I think that, you know, the people in the ecosystem probably now have a fair view of what the total ecosystem is. But I will just say, I want to cover a few issues here if I can. It's a really challenging ecosystem, and I've spent 29 years before I even started this role working in, you know, the most complex engineering systems. This tops them all. It's the system of systems. We could keep going forever. It's so complicated because we have to take the vehicle to market and certify it. The vehicle relies on a whole host of technologies, you know, detect and avoid. It will eventually need some degree of autonomy. That's the way you get the volume. We've got to charge it. We've got to have electric systems that have the redundancy built into them and the lifetime. We've got the digital systems. We all know we need a new ATM system. I could easily go on all afternoon. There are so many technical facets there. So that technology is hard. I would say most of it is moving along, and I don't think there's anything that you'd lose sleep over individually. The challenge, I'm going to lay out a couple of challenges, is it's something we have to co-create and there is no plan for it. Now, I'm a systems engineer, so apologies for the slight dip into terminology, but it's a non-deterministic problem. Most of the big engineering systems, we know what we're going to do, we know what the solution looks like, we plan it and we do it. Here, the system, the total ecosystem, is emerging in front of our very eyes. So what you've got is all these technology themes moving together, the participants talking well and sharing information, but you don't exactly know where you're going to land up. So one of our problems is the architect role. That has to be a combination of people working together. So that's really hard. I do think we're making good progress. The UK is in pretty good shape on that. So yes, we know what all the technologies are. We think they're all moving forward. Are there risks? There are. They're not insurmountable. What will probably trip us up is just a misunderstanding that things happen at the wrong time or we get the wrong system definitions. I'll be honest, and Phil, you alluded to this, so I'm going to answer a different question. The wider issue of talking to the public, and I'm afraid I'm a bit of a broken record here. There is not one public. There are billions of publics. There are 68 million of them in this country. There's so many different views of what we do. So let's not kid ourselves. There's a particular message we have, and then everyone is accepting of what we're doing. That is also a complex system. It's not a technological system. It's a socio-economic system. So the biggest thing that I've learned in this job that's a surprise to me is that we have a social science research director, actually from the West Midlands region, and there's as much effort going into that, the economic case, the social case, the socio-economic benefits. Why should people want to engage? So that is a really big system. And if there was one thing at a bigger level that could trip us all up, it's failing to have that right conversation. So you end up with a perfect set of technology that no one wants, and history is littered with those. And the final thing I was going to do, and this is my second crack record moment, I apologise, I'll try to do no more of them. I've a couple of conferences recently, about 3 in a row, I've started to talk about trying to reframe this. So let's not use the word public acceptance. And I talk a lot about social desirability, because when you're in public acceptance mode, I think subconsciously what we're doing is saying, this tech's fantastic, I'll make the tech work, and at some point downstream when I've finished, I've got to have some clever words that make you accept that tech. That's quite different to, the only reason I'm doing this tech is that you absolutely want it. You've got things you want to do. You've got use cases. How do I develop this with the socio-economic impact right at the start of it? So that's what we need to do. It's more about social desirability than it is public acceptance. But I will say that that's a tough gig. We'll probably come back to this if we get time. But when you go and engage with the public, a lot of people have done public surveys. My somewhat simplistic view of it is, we go and ask people how much you love drones, and they give you an answer. And then the next question, you ask them what a drone is, and they probably have got barely a clue. So you've got to talk to people in terms that they can answer the question meaningfully. For me, that's absolutely about demonstration, physicality, and having a feel for things, and come right back full circle to the urban airport demonstrator in Coventry. That will get the right public conversation as people think what I could do with this and how it benefits. So quite a long answer, but yeah, good view of the technologies, but that won't be nearly enough to make this system work.
Yeah, I think I would go further than that. I don't think it's acceptance, it's actually support. So we need community support, because they will see a benefit from this. And if you don't get that, then you won't get the forgiveness, because things will go wrong. Things will be louder than people thought. Things will be more intrusive. And I think we need public support, which means getting people excited about the potential that this could bring, and how it will save lives.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Paul, would it be possible, apologies, I just want to interject with one more thing in case it doesn't come up. So we can't publish this yet, but we've been engaging in some proper social conversations here in the UK, proper public engagement discussion. We've had a panel of about somewhere between 70 and 80 people selected, very carefully selected for every possible demographic across the length and breadth, every nation in the country, have conversations with people. And that's been done as a bit of proper social research that will get published and critiqued. But when we had the first couple of sessions of that, we as a team joined in. It was really interesting because we had to describe the future flight and what we're doing here in a neutral fashion, so you don't shake the audience too much. So it's quite hard talking about something exciting as this and trying to make it sound bland. But we did that, and then we watched the conversation flow. Now, this group of people, the most active askers of questions and givers of opinions you've ever seen. I guess people self-select onto these panels. But it was really interesting. The things that they came up with, which were potential hazards, things they worried about, the stuff we expected and way more. So you sat there going, wow, they've thought of lots of reasons why this is kind of a difficult thing to do. Then you do a straw poll at the end and saying, having thought about all of that broadly, are you positive about these use cases? And almost everyone was hugely positive. So it was really interesting. They could think of lots more reasons why this is difficult than we could. But after all was said and done, they still said, but this sounds like a really great thing. So having a meaningful conversation is a really good thing to do. And there endeth my lesson, I guess.
No, just sorry to interject there, Gary, and that in a very small sample with the 2 weeks we've had at the Urban Airport in Coventry. We've had a range from 150 school children to 70, 75-year-old pensioners who are walking in, and the reaction's been exactly the same. We get it. That's been one of the key things, that we get it now. Now that we've seen it, we can see the benefits, and that's across the wide spectrum of people that I know it's a small sample, but I quite agree with you. That's the feedback we've had, that we get it. This could actually have a major impact on our lives in a good way.
And Sunil, you're very clear that the first operations should be first responders, so people can understand that lives are being saved, that fire services, police, ambulance services are actually getting a huge benefit, and that really is a community benefit. But for me, the interesting thing is, after that, what next? So after you've saved lives, after you've delivered defibrillators, what next?
And I think that's the start point, as in, the demonstrations that we've been, and those who've been fortunate enough to come and have a look at it, when the police have done the demonstration, it's actually drawn the crowd, and the crowd can actually see what the benefits are. So delivering that safety aspect of it, there are twofold benefits to that. Firstly, the public acceptance that, the flying of drones, they can fly safely. We are now demonstrating that, as an operation, the drones are taking off and landing in our cities, but they're actually going to save lives. The next stage, as I said, incrementally, would be to try and exploit the market for the delivering of goods, logistics, because I think that's where it helps us as a city council to meet our emission targets and net zero targets, because we can't get any more vehicles on the road without having to deliver all the stuff that is, and people more and more are relying on those deliveries coming home. How do we address that? So once you start that, the logistic company, the whole ecosystem in that changes around, and how we deliver goods. So that will help reduce the congestion. And then eventually we look at passenger carrying. So that's the incremental way that I'd look at it.
Thank you. Tim, I'm going to completely change the subject now. Look at it from a technical engineering point of view. We have two choices. We either go with the traditional aviation system, where you, as I said, have an end state where you know exactly how everything's going to work, and you work towards that end state with the standards and the technologies and the procedures that are very clearly laid out, or you do the agile Silicon Valley approach, where you just evolve as you go on, and then you do 6 monthly updates to the software. Or how do we engineer this? How do we practically build vertiports which are vehicle agnostic, as Air One is, where everybody has the same standards of communications, when we don't even know what those standards are at the moment? How do you start? How do you get to that first stage?
It's a really tricky question, and I think like most of the people on the panel, I can see that in 20 years' time, there's so much application for this technology, and I'm absolutely certain that we'll have passengers zipping around in electric aircraft between city centres to airports, town centres to city centres. We'll be using this technology for emergency services. We'll be using this technology for interventions around our critical national infrastructure, power cuts, major breakdowns on highways, getting drones up to survey the rail network to get blockages dealt with quicker. And I think we've talked a lot about this iterative approach, demonstrating the technology. using that platform to demonstrate a little bit more capability and a little bit more capability, and using that platform to sort of to build on the term Gary used earlier around social desirability, not public acceptance, but let's actually prove that these systems can add value to our communities, to our cities, to our rural areas. How do we jump from where we are now to setting a set of standards that allows the industry to innovate appropriately, but to innovate in a way that adds value? Honestly, I don't know. There's an awful lot of people thinking about these problems, and the program that Gary's leading in Future Flight is central to those challenges. But again, we come back to that question of system of systems. We've got to be thinking about this technology and these systems in the round. How are they going to interact with our current transport systems? If we look at passenger transport, why would passengers choose to use this technology? And what will drive them away from their cars, from the train, from their bikes? And if there's one thing I've learned from traveling around the UK on business and interacting with people in the road and in the rail sector, the most important thing from a passenger perspective is knowing with some certainty when you are going to turn up at your destination. If you need to arrive somewhere at 8:55 next Monday morning, and you'll be prepared to pay a bit more for your ticket if you can know for some certainty that you will get there. How do we integrate a technology like this into a cityscape? What impact does weather have? What impact does wind have on a system's operations? How long might it take me to check in and actually board an aircraft like this? What are the security requirements before I get on my eVTOL aircraft? There's lots and lots of questions to be answered. And in my mind, I think between us all in this industry, we've got to pitch that vision, and we've got to work together to develop and iterate on a roadmap that will take us in the right direction.
Thanks.
I'm not sure I've answered your question.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're answering your question with a question, and what I'm trying to do is see what's happened in Coventry and get some of the answers. Martin, what have you learned from Air One? What have you learned from the this demonstration?
I think it started a series of conversations which would simply not have happened without this demonstrator. I don't mean just professional curiosity or political curiosity, but genuine conversations about how can we take some responsibility going forward to not just drop this at demonstrator level, but take a heavy responsibility in open source terms, actually going back to our previous conversation about how we can help other cities in the UK move forward with this. And I think the other thing it does, it hasn't, I know you're searching, Phil, for some of the answers and a bit more clarity, but I think what it's done is it's started to create a sense of we need to prime this more and more and spend more time. One of the things, and it's not a diversion from your question, I think it's relevant. One of the things about learning, and again, I might not surprise you, I've been quite outspoken about this over the years. One of the reasons why, despite spending billions of pounds, certainly in the UK, mainly from the commercial sector on smart city initiatives, one of the reasons, there's a number of reasons why they failed, and we've not delivered endemic in the way we should across a number of smart grid systems, digital conversion, etc., is actually public bodies, stakeholders, private sector, quasi, public bodies, governments don't spend enough time doing what we're doing now, priming it, understanding it, pulling it apart. Is that problem really the problem we're trying to solve, or is it just a secondary one? How big are the opportunities? Now, you might say, well, that's irrelevant. It's not, because if we spend more time on that and don't beat ourselves up about the fact we just simply do not have a clear route through, as Tim and others said, it's so uber complex. It's not intractable, by the way, and it's not wicked. This can be solved, even systemically within the system of systems. This can be solved, but only if we spend more time up front. And unfortunately, despite the fact I am someone who always wants to move forward rather than look behind. This is one of those classic situations where, to be able to answer your question in a year's time, 2 years, 5 years time, we do need to be a bit more humble about the complexity and spend more time priming it. And I'll tell you why, apart from just that answers your bit about what are we learning, it picks up, I think, Gary's very articulate sense around moving beyond the notions of acceptability and actually about a sentiment which is about what's in it for me, right? Because actually the truth about this is we've got 5 miles from where I'm sitting now, some of the world's leading experts on the science behind behaviors and why people decide to do certain things. Some of that academic theory remained very solid through the pandemic, actually. Some of it got pulled apart because actually it's only in real time that you start to see how, Gary's point, that there's just 1,000,001 different complexities about how people respond. But the one thing that I would say is as true of this discussion as it is of many others that have come through a kind of change process, is that actually you have to become very powerful, very coherent, very authentic storytellers. You've got to create a narrative, which unfortunately too many times gets locked into a deficit narrative rather than an asset narrative of what are we moving towards, not what we're moving away from. The human brain is scientifically moving towards wanting to go back to a catastrophic set of deficit and liability, whereas actually we've got to create a story which is compelling about what the future is. And this is so important for this. Then we do the hard yards by Gary and Tim and other people's points. There are many different ways in which you can answer what's in it for me. But this is a key bit, and this is where local authorities and the political environment really needs to stand up. There are always trade-offs. There will never be a point, even if you have a compelling narrative, you build the infrastructure the way we said, we answer some of these questions, what's in it for me? There will always be a trade-off. I'm saying that again as an economist. There will always be those things that are opportunity costs, that are actually externalities, which we just need to accept. But is the overall story compelling enough? And can I answer it at an individual, family, business, community level which says, I get it, I get enough benefit out of that, and I want to be part of how we don't just accept it in a tolerating way, but we actually are part of the future solution. Then demand starts to increase, and then new market solutions come forward. So yeah, at one level, all of this is learning, it's very active, it's very profoundly challenging and difficult. Other things are just very, very simple. Don't miss the point that, do you know what, 25 years ago, we were having conversations in places that now people go, why didn't you have them 25 years before that? What took you so long to get to this point? So let's not think this is Jetson futuristic Arthur C. Clarke vision of the future. This is here and now. The question is, how can we take hearts and minds with us? And finally, I think particularly actually, and I know people on the call will agree with this, with where we are now on the challenges of our communities levelling up in UK cities, but actually across the world, how do we answer that question of what's in it for me? Not just for those that have got disposable income, to be able to choose to literally connect themselves for job opportunities or products or services. How do we use this? And Sunny was right around emergency services, but to be able to connect people with new opportunities from those communities that don't have the same access historically. If we do that together, that creates a fundamentally different economic and social ecosystem. And why would this new urban air next dimension ecosystem not be one of the ways in which we move to a much fairer, more connected place for everybody? Why not?
I think that's absolutely fundamental. You're right. It has to be affordable. It has to be inclusive. And otherwise, it'll become seen as a transport mode for the elite. And that is the last thing we want. Darren, I like the idea of creating a narrative. Let's look at your experience of Air One. Can you give us some positive things that have come out of the experience that you hadn't been expecting? Some really good examples of people saying things or doing things, or things that you might need. For example, do you have a better understanding of the skills that'll be required to operate something like Air One in the future? And how do we start going about meeting that future job prospect? I think you're muted, Darren.
Hopefully that works. Yes, I think in terms of the elitism, yeah, there is a concern about accessibility. When I spoke to the general public in the past couple of weeks, that there is a perception that it is for business travelers. You know, it's really geared up for businessmen who can get to the airport with a shuttle service to reduce the time of travel, and that may be indeed the case, but I would say that the benefit is far more reaching in that it does engage with a lot of people. This community to bring UAM to the people is actually built upon a lot of expertise that sits behind the technology, that sits behind the physical infrastructure, the air infrastructure, the digital infrastructure. Is all those people who are innovators. They are working very hard to bring this technology to fruition, and this is really encompassing of the whole gamut of stakeholders that are involved. Some of those, I believe, are beneficiary from this. We've had, for example, great input from the local community in terms of the Coventry City Council, of course, with the engagement and partnership, but also Coventry University in terms of providing a lot of support on user experience studies, certainly in the early concept development of Air One. And we couldn't have done this without them, because we're in essence only a startup, so we really do rely on collaboration on that side. But also with certainly the schools, the kids coming through last week, there was this notion of there's a required workforce training and education that sits behind this. And again, you know, there's another group of future beneficiaries. So it's not necessarily just the revenue generating side of airport operations, or rather urban airport operations. We tend to think and anticipate that this is going to benefit local pockets. It's not just about those privileged, and really if we look at the delivering of certain high value goods, let's say medical supplies, for example, you know, we're able to look at a quick, unencumbered by traffic congestion, with decarbonizing travel at the same time. This is the first step we see in terms of beginning to integrate UAM into cities, and this is in advance of carrying passengers. So it is a very compelling proposition that hopefully benefit local economy in a world of increasing mobility. And yeah, this is one of many of the observations we've had, and some of the feedback we've had from the public.
Thank you. So, Sunil, have you looked at the impact of Air One on the local economy? Is this something you've had a chance to come up with some conclusions yet?
Not yet. It's very early days, and as I say, you know, our intentions was to really bring the perception of public acceptance. That was the biggest challenge, and how the infrastructure would be accepted in this urban environment. So, you know, these are the next stages, as Martin said. You know, we're not going to shy away from this development, because we see the benefits of developing this further. So, you know, they're the next stages. I think Gary's got his hand up.
Yeah, over to you, Gary.
Thank you, if possible. So that comment, Sunil, and the earlier conversation just made me think of something else. So we talked a lot about engaging with, you know, this wider public and helping them understand and bringing them on board. and I mean this in the nicest possible way, let's not kid ourselves that very senior, very experienced people necessarily have a better understanding. So, it behoves us to bring business leaders, senior politicians, other people too, to understand this journey. And again, what has been executed in Coventry is just a really good example. Come see, come feel, come see what it means. So it was just a point that popped in my head. So it's not just about the local population, the school kids and the travelling public. It's the decision makers also need to feel the future the way that we do.
And we couldn't, and again, this is not in any derogatory way, but we couldn't do anything like this without the support of the likes of Martin Reeves and our politicians. Coventry has, the reason we are so successful is we've got that level of future thinking within our organization, which allows us to do this innovation and this new research and development in technology.
Daniel, your job here is secure for at least.
Thank you, Martin.
Well, I was going to say that, Martin, because most councils, most local authorities in the world are battling with COVID. They don't have any money. They, as far as looking at things 20 years ahead are concerned, that would be great, but they're fixated on the here and now. They're fixated on getting to the next 6 months without having major disruptions. What made you think that this is something that you wanted to host?
Simply because, and we're all different, and joking aside, there is a general culture which people talk about too much, but the way we do things around here in Coventry, a political cross-party support for disruption, innovation, fast failure, and I mean it, putting arms around when things don't go quite. Luckily, most of the things that we've trialed over the years have had significant value, or at least sufficient value, depending on the reputational, financial, political capital we've put into it. But even if they haven't, there's been arms round and we've moved on and we've learned. So I have to do a shout out to local politicians of all administrations, actually. But the reason is quite clear, right? The social challenges, and you've talked about some of them coming down through the pandemic, right? With inequalities, which are now more structurally deep and wide in our communities and within our places, right? You've got a choice as leaders where it's not a bad thing, but some are putting what I call their eyes in and down to deal with that, and that's absolutely fine. My view of that by the politicians in Coventry has always been, yes, we do understand that, but if you are to provide new opportunities to deal with those very real here and now issues, you have to have your eyes up and out, and actually it has to be simultaneous. Now, do you know what? That creates a massive bandwidth issue, it creates a massive resilience issue, but this is the point, and this is why brilliant that people on chat have said this as well. For far too long, some of the upsides that we're all talking about, that within the next decade, I think Tim said 2 decades, let's hope within the next decade, 15 years, we see a complete change of the way in which we just go, yeah, people connect to each other like this. But just imagine if that value there was not to be shared in an inclusive way to a raft of other communities. The in and down will still be really challenging. If, however, we can find a way of that success, that productivity gain, that time release, to be able to be shared by a much broader set of our communities across all UK cities, then you start to realise that looking ahead and re-envisioning is not about ignoring the here and now. It's actually about giving a counterweight and a counterbalance to the inevitable social challenges. And I'll finish with this bit, because I don't think I'm meant to have been on this bit of the panel, but I've just enjoyed it so much, I stuck with it. So you could have booed me off, Phil. But I think if you look across UK cities now, who are facing some endemic challenges, stuck actually in their ability to leap forward in the ways that we're trying to talk, we all share those same social challenges, inequalities. Those UK cities that are able to look ahead with political support, try stuff, and structure it in a strategic way with the story that we've talked about, in my view, I would say, wouldn't I, will find quicker remedy and solution to those inequality, structural, social problems by, in effect, moving and leapfrogging over technologically, digitally, using platforms that are here and now to maybe advance future social and economic challenges, is in my view, which is why I will carry on taking risks, and I will stand up in front of any broadcast environment and say, yeah, a public body has spent that. Yes, we have put that on the line because these are the reasons why, and our politicians will stand side by side on it. So That's the answer to that question.
Thank you. So there's a very clear message here. If we want to create a positive narrative, we have to do it in a way so that aims specifically at local politicians in cities around the world to tell them the good things that are happening, the benefits this disruptive technology will bring to their communities, and they should get on board. Tim, we've got the potential of a Paris vertiport in sorry to mention another city, I know it's behind Coventry, but anyway, Paris is planning to do something in a couple of years' time with vertiports taking passengers to the Olympic Games from vertiports in the city centre. How important was the success of something like that, as well as Coventry, in terms of creating that narrative? In other words, people again can see something and they'll then start to say, actually, we want this for our city. These demonstrations are very important, aren't they?
Absolutely, and even for us who are sort of on a day-to-day basis wrapped up in this industry. For me, I only got the chance to visit Coventry last week, and it was mind-blowing. You know, with so much of what we deal with is on paper at the moment. So much of the enthusiasm that's being generated and the sort of the vision building in the sector sits in people's heads and sits in reports and sits in nice infographics. But to actually be able to walk around the facility that Darren and Sunil and Martin have enabled was fantastic. And for me, the opportunity of Paris 24 is just another step on that roadmap to a potential end point, a potential future point that none of us can quite put our fingers on, but just raises the profile again of this type of technology. How important is it? For me, it's critical. How important is it that it goes smoothly? It's even more critical. So what I envisage in this, this roadmap is this sort of gradual rising tide of public acceptance, of social desirability, of knowledge about what UAM and AAM are or can be, a general acceptance, familiarity with the terms. I think we need to have a proper thing to whether UAM is the right acronym to be using. Do we need another name for this type of technology? We need to get the marketing people on that question. But we need to be really conscious that incidents at this early stage in a technology, particularly from a safety perspective, can be the nail in the coffin for developing technology. High profile incident, we really need, the whole sector needs to be focused on the safety aspect at the moment, particularly where passengers, pilots are concerned. And absolutely, the industry is focused on those things, but we need to make sure that we don't lose that crystal clear focus on what really is important here.
And there's a couple of really interesting points there. I've seen some public perception surveys that doesn't put safety at the top, because people think if it flies, it must be certified, therefore it's safe. So we don't actually have to think about that, which is a bit counterintuitive in a way. But also, what is again a bit of a tangent, but what is a reasonable target level of safety? Should it be the same as commercial aviation, or should it be the same that we accept in our road system, which is horrendously problematic for me? I mean, should we just put it somewhere in between? Who gets to answer these questions? Does the market get to answer the question? Is it the regulator? And if it's the regulator, how do we do that?
Yeah, sorry.
I was going to go after you.
Thank you, Sunil. I appreciate that. Sorry. Ultimately, the public gets to answer that question, but it's quite a sophisticated question. You can't go out and ask them what's your target level of safety, because they'll have no idea what target level of safety means. But eventually, the public has to decide. I was taught very first airworthiness course I did. There's a phrase that stuck in my brain that the Civil Aviation Authority's job is to maintain the level of safety that the public is prepared to pay for and accept. So it is it's a public consultation, it's a rather complex one. The point I wanted to make, though, not to pick up on Tim's point, I mean, a couple of things that need to be amplified. Number one, I think the public, Phil, I think you said the public doesn't put safety at the top, it probably perceives this to be safe. But if there is an incident, the speed at which they'll associate that incident with new technology, new things that have been done, you've taken inappropriate risks, you've introduced things that did not exist before, under the microscope scrutiny will be immense. So we've talked about that for 3 years. So we know that's kind of where we sit and we tread very, very carefully. The safety thing, we published a report about 18 months ago. This is one of the ones that I drove personally because I've been involved in safety boards for more than 15 years in big aerospace. The big issue for me, trying to make this kind of quite simple, is the way that the system is regulated to be safe is not everything that keeps the system safe. It's the bare minimum. Now, from my time in big aerospace, and I'm sure all companies are the same, we did things way beyond that are about targets, but principally they're about behaviors and culture. It's just inculcated, it's steeped in you. Everything is about safety. So as you then transition to a whole load of new players with a different breakdown, many more smaller companies going to operate in different ways. So all the operational risks will be different. You'll have different players on the maintenance and so on. It is a non-trivial exercise keeping that thing safe. And it's not enough to just export all the rules to them and train the people. So yeah, our big safety case report was looking at all those subtle people factors and how do we keep people thinking that way. Exactly to Tim's point, you've got to have it front and center all the time and bring everyone on board, understanding the system has to be safe. And for me, it has to be at least as safe as commercial air transport in fatal incidents per revenue passenger kilometre. It has to be at least that safe because we know we can do that. And I think that should be our target.
And just to follow on from that, Phil, as I say, I think Tim covered it quite well. That where do we place safety for local authorities? For us engaging in some of these projects and the innovative projects that we've done, we've learned through those projects. So, for example, when we were doing the autonomous vehicles, as Martin mentioned previously, operating autonomous vehicles on the famous city Coventry's Ring Road was a challenge. Normal local people don't want to drive there, but the safety cases were, how do we have that operating? Not only the OEMs learned a lot from that, because that's the real case, that this is real life, this is what you getting is how it operates in real life. Where the city councils and where the safety cases are built up is where you've got a live environment you're testing in. And that's when you get the real feedback. And that's where we as a local authority will not compromise safety in any way, because that politically, it absolutely would destroy us. It would not give us those sort of challenges that we're able to do. So, we put safety right at the top of it. How do we work that within the development is having those partnerships, having these consortiums that we are set up as a team. So, you've got the safety angle covered, you've got the legislative angles covered. And how we progress with that that's where we find the benefits. And this is how we're able to move things forward, but making sure that the safety is key. But as you said, Gary, you've been in the industry. Local authorities don't have that expertise in the aviation sector. And this is where we rely on the expertise of the aviation industry to support us and make us understand, or let us understand, what is required to operate the aviation system in an urban environment.
I think Phil and colleagues, though, and I know you probably want to move on, Phil. We could have a whole conference on this. It's brilliant, yeah. Gary and others, but as a living lab, which Coventry's always been, you kind of need to hold, whilst I'm not an expert, I don't know anything like Gary does around the safety environment. What I do know is that when you see competence that's quite fragile and you see a catastrophic set of circumstances, that can have an effect at all levels, psychosocially, politically, economically, which you can never recover. That's absolutely true. But equally, when you see what I call positive attrition, where you see now, of course, the world of social opinion formers and influencers, where they participate, it's not only safe, it goes beyond their expectations of comfort and confidence. That then becomes very powerful. But the other thing is, and Gary mentioned it about evidence, and I know that's not very sexy, but as a recovering academic, I always go back to evidence. So when we, for example, decided in Coventry to do something quite radical around not just the first ever 20 mile an hour, but actually prior to that, go for proper learning from the Netherlands and elsewhere, shared space. All we got was this notion of people will die. This will be catastrophic. Now, of course, there's a moment when you roll this out in any city environment, you go, thank God, apart from the human cost of this, please, because we know this is the right thing to do, evidence tells us it will, you wait and you get that social influence, you get the naysayers. But now when we look back, the metric for us of those, thank God, killed or seriously injured within that environment has gone down. It's gone down rapidly. So not only is it the right thing to do for all the environmental reasons, but actually it works as the evidence told us. But there was that moment, is my point, maybe a sliding doors moment where, you know, something catastrophic, maybe a random event even that couldn't have been predicted, would have changed that confidence level, even though the underlying metrics were telling us we were moving in the right direction, if that made sense. And I just think this is a really fascinating debate, and it's part of Tim's point about systems within systems and layer. But let's not jettison some of our learning from other things that have taught us quite well, because I think they are transferable.
I think that's really interesting, but also perceptions and priorities of people are changing. I mean, almost, you know, certainly between generations, but also now, you know, the environment is becoming much more of an issue. Darren, when you've been speaking to people, how many of them have flagged up safety as a potential concern, environment, privacy? Have you, I know it's difficult to make any quantitative detailed reply, but are there anything they've asked you that has surprised you, or is it a lack of concern over safety or privacy? Has that surprised you?
Perhaps it's not so much a lack. I think they were just overwhelmed with the vision of the future, that they perhaps forgotten about, yeah, some of the potential side effects of that. Certainly the issue of privacy is one that I had to touch and draw to their attention. For example, the issue of rights to fly over people's properties, and in terms of this compromise in security and the overlooking aspects, those are actually things that we have to point out to them. But they get that. We did get one interesting point about the impact on the local wildlife environments in terms of birds, etc. So that's very much this similar concern as any airports, really, when you do put things up into flight. But yes, largely we have to draw upon the issue of safety, and I point out to them that, you know, it is taken very seriously. I mentioned that we actually have to close our doors during the flight demonstrations, because outside our front door is actually within the 50-meter safety zone, and I point to them that yes, that hopefully in the future could be relaxed for the moment that it essentially renders our vertiport unusable during flight time. So something has to be looked into. Certainly, if the design doesn't evolve, or of the regulatory aspect of the framework doesn't evolve, then it's not possible to have a properly functional vertiport.
Sorry, could I just get it absolutely straight?
Yeah.
So when you have a drone taking off on the vertiport, the entire vertiport has to become like a sanitized area. You can't go in or out of it.
In terms of the permissions we've had with the CAA, yes, strictly speaking, and we completely agree with that, because this is a demonstrator. We don't know the aircraft behaviors or the drone behaviors, and it will take some time until it's proven otherwise. But for the moment, yeah, we have to err on the side of safety. But again, that's something I had to point out to the public.
Yeah. So just to be granular for the audience, though, because I think this is really important. Someone probably knows what I'm going to say.
Yeah.
This is all this conversation about how you incrementally and sometimes hopefully exponentially move forward on learning, right? So we were literally going across to meet colleagues before the Urban Airport even opened. Now, I was there, not as I'm particularly important, but I'm there with the director responsible for transport and highways, and we were held within the 50-metre exclusion zone. And we knew we were being held because clearly they were waiting for the first of the official drones to take off, right? As I then watched up our main arterial road and watched what a 3-minute delay does at peak times to see, ironically, delivery vehicles, people going about their work. So clearly what that does is it piques interest. It potentially can make everyone feel this disruption is far too big. But it then gets you thinking, well, what then is acceptable? 25 metres? Can we have conversations with what would people be prepared to wait for a length of time? So again, I haven't got the answers, but I just thought it was interesting. It hits you palpably rather than being an academic exercise about, oh yeah, there's an exclusion zone. I got caught right in it at exactly that time. It wasn't
Yes.
it was unexpected. A city will come to a standstill. Simple. So therefore you have to find a way through it, which compromises, pragmatizes, and everything else. So I just like to share that personal view.
You're quite right, Martin. And that was the first ever flight for that size of drone. That was the largest drone ever flown in an urban environment, and that was the inaugural flight. But the other part to that is that's for the drone operators, but the police, and this is what I was referring to earlier, Phil, that the police don't have to have that exclusion zone. So when they're flying, you don't have to stop that traffic. Now, that's the learning, that's the legislative change that we would work with the government to say, look, you know, if they can do it, and if we can prove the safety cases that the drones that are operating currently are equally as safe as what the police drones are, then we don't need that. But that's that legislative change that we need to talk through with the government and all the other authorities.
This is getting really interesting. Now we're getting down to the nitty-gritty of actually operations, which is unfortunately sort of pretty close to the end. So we've 60 people have stayed with us, and this will be recorded and passed on to many hundreds of others. So in the last 10 minutes, I'd just like to get each of your views then, really, on from what we've learned at Coventry. Are you sort of more or less optimistic about evolving this industry so we will be able to fly eVTOLs in urban environments by 2030, say, for example, on a regular basis? What I've seen is that it's a lot more complicated, but there's also a lot more goodwill behind it, and also a lot more determination, although I don't know where the money's coming from. But if I could ask you, each one of you, what your view of what we've learned at Coventry has actually brought to that evolution. Gary, perhaps I can start with you.
I mean, really quickly, I recognise time's ticking on. I'm uber optimistic about pretty much everything, and certainly anything I choose to touch. So I'm convinced it will happen anyway. But Sunil will probably know this. When I first visited, you were still a building site, and when I walked in, you know, my jaw dropped, even though it was still a building site, because you walk into that and go, now I can see this thing I believe in. I can now see the thing I believe in. So it put me, as somebody who was convinced, already in a different place. A more important thing I would say, though, I am more optimistic even than that, having seen the thing play out. And really, it's because of this thing we've talked about several times this afternoon. It's engaging with people who are not inside the tent on this. People are outside and seeing broadly a positive conversation. And one really, really small anecdote. The first day I was there, the team took a photograph of me and they said, please just don't post it on social media. And as I got back home, on my Reddit feed of all places, some photographs appeared, and I was paranoid, thinking, I hope they don't think it was me. But it was someone else. It's one of your population from Coventry wandering past at the time when the supernal aircraft was going in, and they posted it on a Reddit feed, on Casual UK for people into Reddit, which is very irreverent, slightly Mickey taking kind of stuff. And it was posted. And beyond about the first 3 posts, that commentary became really positive and really enthused, you know, in a thread that normally is given to poking holes and joking about everything. And so that reaction and the public's reaction, that makes me more positive. People can see it, they can feel it. They'll now get enthusiastic too.
Thank you very much. Martin, are you more optimistic or less optimistic?
Oh, listen, I'm going to out optimize Gary. And Sunil knows this. Nothing is impossible. And I do things like this and listen to people that know a lot more about the potential of this sector, the upsides and downsides, and the ingenuity, the brilliance of not just people on this conference, but from the UK and around the world, but I would say particularly the UK, makes me feel that of course this is possible. But let me say why I think it's more possible than even when I first started thinking and seeing this. Think about the alternative. We have UK cities that are, quite frankly, far too densely spatially planned. We have too much congested and contested spaces and places. We have a determination, wherever people think about this notion of a rush to the countryside, right? It was a fallacy when it was first thought about 15, 20 years ago with mass depopulation of urban areas, and a sense then that the ideal for the rural areas would be forever. Rubbish. I knew it wasn't going to happen then. Then the pandemic hit. Yeah, we'll never see city centres and dense urban areas. Nonsense. The way we use the space will change. If we don't think differently about the next dimension, and we think we can find our way through spatially planning for increased population, increased connectivity between products, services, connectivity, and be green and sustainable, then even if I wasn't an optimist, and even if I didn't think I was surrounded by ingenious, brilliant people, I would say, yes, it's got to happen, because the alternative is so rubbish, so debilitating, so regressive, that I can't handle that. And it'll go even beyond my level of optimism. Over and out.
Thank you, Martin. We need some other. Well, are there any other cities you quite fancy going to and talking about this? Because I think that's a really
Helsinki. Any Asian countries on this call, I'd love to go and visit there. And Sunil can come with me after these talk.
We're quite happy to sell our experience, and we're quite happy to actually encourage, because again, just jumping in, whether I was the next or not, just following on, if it's going to save lives, you think about it, just literally take it into the lowest form. If I can get an organ or a defibrillator on a site within minutes, rather than having hours or half an hour to get something there, and I've saved a life, why would you not want to buy into that? So the optimism for me is this will happen, and my prediction, and this is where I've been banning on, that within the next couple of years, we will see these operations happening very quickly, especially within the NHS sector, where it's going to start saving lives. So my optimism is right there with Martin and Gary.
Thank you. Tim, more optimistic or less optimistic?
I don't know if I can quite live up to Martin's level of optimism, but I am mega optimistic about this technology. The technology, I'm certain, will come. The use cases, I think, are already there, particularly around that emergency response, around the healthcare, around the critical national infrastructure piece, which I think get us moving. For me, proving the business cases, proving the socio-economic cases, ensuring that these technologies aren't just for the ultra super mega rich and actually make a difference to the communities that they're deployed in is really high on my list to make sure that we're thinking about all the way.
Thanks, Darren. And the last word to you. I mean, you've put this thing up, so you've seen how much it costs you time and stress.
I sit in the same camp as the rest of the panel, so as designers, we've got optimism in our blood and running through our veins, I suppose. But what's encouraging is that we're able to convince others within the past 2 weeks that they've become believers and they can see what the future looks like. And I think we're able to show and tell in real life what they can't really visualize from looking at drawings that we would otherwise produce to support our vision. But we are very lucky to be able to have this, and thank you really those on the panel, because they're pretty much integral to making that happen. Innovate UK, the Coventry City Council. So truly grateful, and if anything, I suppose in the course of today's webinars, that the issue of funding in terms of taking it to the next step, I think that is a real challenge to us, and I think that has brought that to me home a very serious point, because you don't get that flavor when you opening your doors to to industry and the general public, because that really sits behind in the back room. But it is something that we have to address because we're all keen to take this to the next step. And we've spoken to our ecosystem partners. Yes, we want to move this to the next level where we can start building a network and actually test Phoebe loss. And absolutely, but yes, we're scratching our heads as to how we will need to be able to fund this. So again, we have to tap into those partners in the ecosystem to find a way. But I believe the demonstrator in Coventry will assist us in creating those connections to enable people to come together and discuss what are the next possible steps.
Darren, thank you very much indeed. Gary, Sunil, Martin, Tim, and Darren, thank you very much. Goodbye. And thank you for everybody for watching and taking part. It's been a really interesting discussion. And see you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you all.